God commanded them to populate the earth. They decided to stay in one place. And God scrambles them and sends them into all different places. Now what we find is Abraham, who at this time is named Abram. His father and his brothers all left. They left Ur, bound for Canaan. Now Abraham, or Abraham's father, Haran, had died. The family settled in. Abraham's grandfather died. They settled in the city of Haran. Now, after they moved into Canaan, we find the text here is that Abraham receives his call. Now, today as we examine Christianity, when we look at people in general, we look at Christianity as a whole, many of us in the church really don't have a sense of purpose or an understanding of what God has saved us to do. Now, if you examine truthfully, if we can be real tonight, the majority of the Christians believe that they've been saved to go to heaven. And that's it. Just got saved and you're on your way to heaven. But what many people don't realize is that heaven is your reward. It's the reward for those who have been faithful unto God by their lives. Amen? Now, I say tonight to each of you that if you're in your church and you're doing, and you're in a service, or you're in a ministry or an auxiliary, and that's all you're doing, then you're living beneath purpose. Our text today, it examines one of the most famous religious figures in the Bible, Abraham. We find him at the point of being called Abram. Now here, we find that the text, we find him living with his father. And if you study it, you'll find that Abraham was content. He's living in his father's house, and he's content living this normal life. When God calls him, God all of a sudden sees where he is, and God calls him. Now, as we have come to know from the story, that Abraham may have been happy with where he was, and he was okay with his situation, but God wasn't okay with where he was, and God calls him. Now, I want to say to somebody today that wherever you are and wherever you are in your mental capacity, you may be content with where you are in ministry. But I want to say to you tonight that God isn't content with where you are in ministry. I want you to know that a calling is coming. What you do with that calling is going to dictate how your life turns out. Now, what many of us don't realize is that God has deposited great things inside of you. And he has set in motion. Anything that God sets in motion never returns to him unaccomplished. It never returns to him void. Now the text here, it shows us that God calls Abraham to a great work. Now the great work may have cost him a lot. He may have had to pay a great deal of pain and suffering, but in the end, we discover from reading the story that it does pay off. I want to talk to you all real quickly on the subject of called to do a great work. How many of you in here know that you've been called to do a great work? Okay, thank you for the few of y'all. How many of y'all know that you didn't get saved just to get saved, but you were called to a great work? If you don't have it, you will before it's over. Understand that we look here at the text, and we understand that Abraham, or Abram at this time, receives a call from God. Now, to be called, it means that God has chosen you to do a work for him based upon his divine plan for creating you and equipping you. In other words, God has chosen you based upon the things he put inside of you. And God says, listen, it's time now for you to begin to put out what I put inside of you. If I can drop something in your spirit tonight, I want all of you to see something, that everybody has a call. Look at your neighbor and tell your neighbor, you got a call. Every one of us has been called. Every one of us has a great calling upon our lives. Now, grab this. Not everyone has been called to greatness, but all have been called to great works. If I can drop this in your spirit, I need y'all to get this. Understand that what we do in the church is that we're running after greatness, but we're not running after great work. Understand that everybody's not going to reach the platform of being set in the world where everybody knows your name, but it does not disqualify you from the work that God has put into your life. I wish somebody knew what I was talking about. understand here that when we read in the New Testament, one of the things that we discover is that most of us believe that the only famous folk in the New Testament was Paul, Peter, and John because we read their book. But we have forgotten about the other disciples that Jesus discipled just like them. So understand, nobody may know your name. They may not put your name up on a billboard, but understand, the work that you do is just as great as somebody whose name is on a billboard. Stop chasing greatness and start chasing great work. Understand here, listen, that your calling is not greater than mine. We're all servants of the same God. What's happened in church and why folk have an issue with answering the call is because we feel like the call we got ain't as good as the call somebody else got. But understand, if I can drop something in your spirit, do you not know that there's some things in this world that only you can do? There's some things that God has put inside of you that nobody else on the face of the earth, nobody in history could ever do what God designed you to do. And so what you have to understand is stop looking down the street at what somebody else is doing. Stop looking at how much success other folk can have, because here's the thing, when the rubber meets the road, the world ain't better until you put your stuff out. Understand that God is saying, what I put inside of you, the world has got to have, and what I put inside of you, nobody else has. I wish I had a church that knew what I was talking about. How many of you know that you've been destined for greatness? Understand here that God chooses Abraham based upon what he has created him to do and what he's equipped him to do. 1 Corinthians tells us, 1 Corinthians chapter 1:27 says, but God has chosen the foolish things of the world to put to shame the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to put to shame the things that are mighty, and the base things of the world and the things which are despised God has chosen, and the things which are not, to bring nothing to the things that are. Y'all praying with me? Also, First Peter, he piggybacks on it. He says, but you are a chosen generation, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, his own special people. Anybody in the house special? His own special people, that you may proclaim the praises of him who called you out of darkness into the marvelous light. Understand here that when you saw me, you saw something that was a designer's original. When you saw me, you saw an original. You saw something that God never ever created again. Acts chapter 22 verses 14 says it like this. Then he said, God, the God of our Father, has chosen you that you should know his will and see the just one and hear the voice of his mouth. For you will be his witnesses to all men of what you have seen and heard. Understand that we've all received a call. We've all been saved for a purpose. We've all been given a mandate that we must carry forth before our tongues stick to the roof of our mouths. Understand that we look at the story that Abraham is in his father's house. And as far as Abraham is concerned, he is content and he's okay with where he is. But God looks at him and says, listen, that's too much potential sitting there. I'm here to tell somebody that God is looking at you and God is saying that's too much potential to be just sitting in the choir. He's saying that's just too much potential for you to be sitting on the door ushering. God said you got too much inside of you to just be sitting in the pews clapping your hands for somebody else. God is saying, I know you content coming on Sunday. I know you content with just serving in the ministry. But God said, I ain't content. And the calling is coming. Here we find in the text that he calls Abraham, but he calls him out, Desmond. He said, listen, I'm going to need you to step out. And I'm gonna need you to get a little inconvenience. Charles, you have to understand that when you get called, it's going to be a great inconvenience. When God begins to really reveal and open up those things that he has for you to do, what's going to happen is it's going to cause you a whole lot of inconvenience. Don't look for that thing to just line up and the ducks all line up. Don't look for it to be cute. Don't look for it to just line up the way that you want. When God begins to work, God always does things in an unorthodox ways. I think if I ain't mistaken, he does say that my ways are not your ways. My thoughts are not your thoughts. God said, listen, I don't think like y'all. I don't work like y'all. I don't operate. So when God begins to work out a plan, it's never going to work out the way you think it's going to work out. Look at somebody and say, stop thinking about it. Understand that we find that there are some things, and there's some things I want you to understand. The text shows us about a calling. First of all, I see here that Abraham is called out. He's called out and he's called to leave where he is. Understand this one simple thing, that your calling goes beyond your service in church. What's happened in church is that we don't recognize the seriousness of our calling. Let me drop this in your spirit. Some of us are just so happy with ushering, and we think we just done God a big favor because we've been ushering. But understand that ushering is a gift.